Then Man Walking was produced 26 years ago appears to be standard liberal Hollywood propaganda film at first view in several essential aspects. However, the picture differs from others in the genre. It's about a murderer who is not only obviously guilty of the act but only kind of nasty, which goes against decades of such films. Not only does the film have a nun as the main character, but it also largely relies on Catholic ideals of atonement. Dead Man Walking presents as a statement that was far ahead of its time, especially for popular entertainment, that there is capacity for pity not only for innocent individuals convicted of crimes and for guilty persons who committed minor crimes, but even for those who commit the most heinous atrocities. Further explanation that are connected on this movie will tackle together with its other information.
Dead Man Walking is a 1995 American crime drama film starring Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn, and co-produced and directed by Tim Robbins, who adapted the screenplay from the 1993 non-fiction book of the same name, which is The Dead Man Walking. A convicted murderer on a death row and a nun who befriends him. Through the portrayal of finely drawn characters and their interaction as the days, hours, and minutes tick down to the condemned man's execution, powerful emotions are unleashed. It was released on December 29, 1995.
Sister Helen visits the convicted murderer Matthew Poncelet during the final week before his state-ordered execution. Through her miniseries as a nun, Sister Helen works in the poor African-American St. Thomas projects of New Orleans and first comes into contact with Poncelet through his letters sent to her order. She responds to Poncelet's letter, which leads her to visit Poncelet in jail. Though inexperienced in criminal chaplaincy, Sister Helen becomes Poncelet's spiritual counselor and connects Poncelet with lawyer Hilton Barber, who helps Poncelet appeal his conviction with the State Board of Capital Punishment, Governor Benedict of Louisiana, and the State of Louisiana Supreme Court without success. After Mr. Delacroix, one of the victims' fathers, calls Sister Helen on helping Poncelet. Sister Helen visits the victims' family and listens to their stories of pain and suffering. Comforted with a tidal wave of opposition and criticism, Sister Helen helps Matthew Poncelet come to terms with the responsibility of murder and rape he committed. In addition to her help, the nun also tries to reach out spiritually and assist as a guide to salvation as he walks to his death by lethal injection.
The story revolves around a nun who received a desperate letter from a convicted man trying to save his life from a death row. Comforting the condemned man while his execution approaches, the nun begins to show empathy. A nun who's in a paradox of caring to the pathetic man while understanding the weight of the sin that he carries, and she must choose between the life of a man who commits a heinous crime and the justice for the suffering and anguish of the victims' families. Through the course of the movie, the answer that the nun found is to help the convicted man realize the consequence of his crime, and the condemned man takes responsibility to the crimes that he committed. In the end, this movie made me think that from the side of the nun, there are times where we are stuck in a situation wherein both paths will cause something. However, we must only choose one and we mustn't let our emotions sway our choices. And from the side of the convicted man, we must realize the weight of our mistakes and take responsibility for it.
As death row convict Matthew Poncelet approaches his execution date, he requests the assistance of Sister Helen Prejean in making one last request. Claiming innocence in the killings of a young couple, Poncelet develops feelings for Prejean and pays visit to both of his family and the families of the victims. Wanting to discover about the case, Prejean tries everything she can to comfort and console Poncelet when things begin to seem grim for him. In terms of the characters' behavior, they are prone to addiction and risk takers when it comes to decision making. For addicts, the long-term hazards of addiction are overlooked in favor of the short-term pleasure. As a result, the effects of addiction can be far-reaching, while risk-taking is defined as any unconsciously or unconsciously related activity with a perceived uncertainty about its result and or about its potential advantages or cost for one's own and others' physical, economic, or psychosocial well-being. It triggers actual brain changes, which might explain why risk takers appear to grow addicted to adrenaline so rapidly.
The term homeostasis refers to the body's desire to maintain a specific level of equilibrium. Autonomous systems such as the ANS and the endocrine system, the hypothalamus, regulate most homeostatic mechanisms. When it comes to regulating the body's vital organs, the individual does not even have to think about it. This includes everything from blood pressure and heart rate to temperature and chemical balance. Moving on to emotions, we experience a wide range of emotions in our daily lives. We call our subjective emotions feelings. Emotion usually refers to a subjective, intense, affective state triggered by something we're aware of. Prior to Poncelet's execution on the day Helen had not returned, he was upset. When he first saw her, he was agitated and worried, but when she apologized, he looked comforted. Inmates on death row often live in a state of constant fear. When the guards started walking him, he had the subjective experience of unpleasant emotions, anger, fear, and sorrow. Angry because they won't let him wear his boots to his execution. His external bodily changes, his face showing terror and body shivers from the strong emotion he's feeling because his death is imminent.
The feeling of doing something but we don't really need to do to get through the day is called non-homeostatic motivation. We often get to choose what we want to do because we are already satisfied on the previous things that we have already done. Non-homeostatic is what a person would do because that person is motivated to do it without expecting anything. Since the society have an unspoken rule in events, people tend to overeat or undereat and it became normal. Because of its long-term effect, people usually get addicted to this thing, although it can't really help with their lives but make it worse most of the time, which is non-homeostatic. The motivation is coming from the unspoken rule of the society that they usually do. Their findings suggest that the establishment of brain plasticity, similar to the effects of drugs of addiction, requires more than just a predilection of certain foods.
The ability to recognize emotions in other people's faces may be mediated by a different area of the brain, like not having guts to stand up for something, or taking responsibility for killing innocent people, or strong emotions such as fear, anger, or extreme grief arouse sympathetic responses in the ANS, while quieter emotions such as contentment and sadness are thought to activate the parasympathetic division of the ANS. Like for example, Matthew Poncelet says he's prayed for them kids, he's never done that before, and he hopes that his death can give them parents some relief, and that's where quieter emotions comes in, where thoughts activates our parasympathetic division. Some events were identified which occurred during emotions. Psychologists had tried to identify the order of these events and what changes are associated with each event. According to Canon, the feeling of emotion and preparing of the body for action occurred at the same time, and he proposes that the thalamus was responsible for emotional experience and the hypothalamus for the expression of emotion.
As for the final analysis, we were able to gather enough information in order for us to relate to the movie with the previous topics that were discussed. It is undeniable that the movie was able to play with the emotions and perceptions of the audience. However, it is without a doubt a gruesome yet tragic story of a man, Matthew Poncelet, and how the nun, Helen, was able to make him realize for all the terrifying and unmerciful acts he has done. This movie contains disturbing acts of violence which, as previously mentioned numerous times on this presentation, can be connected to our topic since it revolves around the loss of control from the convicted man, Matthew. As for the entirety of our presentation, we were able to come up with the realization that Doing these vicious crimes may be possible to be committed by anyone, everyone, as it somehow relates to homeostasis and other psychological factors that can be acquired by anyone depending on their environment. Therefore, this movie has taught us and gave us higher awareness of the psychological issue and how it functions in our life.